All right, I've been getting a lot of great questions, and we'll go through some of those today. Some are going to be a little bit technical. I'll try not to go too deep. And some will just be simple, everyday questions about body language. All right, so here's one. First one is, in what ways can understanding microexpressions improve interrogation techniques? That's actually a great question. So when you're dealing with microexpressions are this, is when you're trying to hide an emotion and it sort of slips out, it leaks, in other words. You'll see it in court a lot. If you'll go back and watch the Fonnie Willis video I did, it's a quick explanation, some great examples of microexpressions, especially of contempt. So let's say we're talking about contempt, and you ask someone a question and about a person. And they're saying, yeah, I like that person. They're really good. But you see a little dink right there. Contempt is one of the only. It's not the only. A lot of people say it's the only facial expression that uses, it's asymmetric. Well, there are others, but they're a blend of emotions. Again, we won't get into these real deep. However, the microexpression will be just a really quick pop of contempt. Sometimes it's really big, but it happens really fast, and sometimes it's really small. That's actually a really good question. Can observation of baseline behavior significantly enhance the accuracy of detecting deception? If so, how? Yeah, I mean, you base pretty much all interrogations from getting a baseline first, how they act when they're not stressed. If it's an interrogation, yeah. So we don't have to say interrogation. Let's just say you're talking to a person that you know, or somebody at work, that kind of thing. You'll get an idea of how they act normally, because when they act all gassed up or geeked up or fired up, they look different. So you're like, something's up here. So in other words, you have to know how they look when they're not stressed, how they look when they're sending an email or just talking to people or eating lunch, how they act, how do they talk, how's their voice sound, how fast do they talk, how many times a minute do their eyes blink? Do you have a high blink rate or a low blink rate? Then as you speak with them and you start getting into questions about, say you have a question about something, then it may not even be something you're trying to find out if they're being deceptive or not, but you ask them a question and things change dramatically in their body language. Let's say you ask them a question, whatever the question would be, and they go, well, what I do know, and so what you see is that back up and a little bit of a micro expression of here of anger and then contempt a little bit, try to do those fairly real. And then see that deep breath. That means they've thought about what you're talking about. This isn't a new situation for them. They've been thinking about whatever that situation is, and they're getting ready to deliver that information to you. So take into consideration what you saw on their face. Are they angry? So be looking for that. Do they have contempt for this person? Be listening for things that may cue you into that. So look for those little things when you ask someone a question or just in a normal conversation about somebody. There's tons of things you can look for. Those are just little examples, but we'll get into other ones as we go along. Here's the next question. But you know what? A great example of looking for a baseline and then asking the person questions is we did. Greg Hartley and I did a thing for Dr. Phil where we brought in Don Wells. Remember him? His little daughter Summer's missing, and Summer's mother Candace, that's Don's wife. And what you saw, or if you watched it, what you would see on TV on the Dr. Phil show was Greg and I just talking to him. Before that, we knew what they looked like when they were relaxed because we hung out with them for like an hour. Before that, went in the green room, and then we all stood outside while they smoked cigarettes, and Greg and I stood there and talked to them, kind of goofed around with them. We told jokes and listened to a couple of stories of theirs, and we knew how they looked when they were relaxed. From the interview Greg and I did, even though it was really calm and nothing big was happening, the one little thing I threw in there is what triggered her to get all upset. And this is completely out of her baseline. We're talking about her missing daughter. So that really was a great way to compare example, if you'll go watch it, example of comparing their baseline of being relaxed to going in and being interviewed about something that's uncomfortable for them. All right. Let's see. How do power dynamics within a group setting manifest through nonverbal communication? Well, that's a great question too, because when you watch a group of people, and this is going to sound weird and creepy, but I love watching groups of people because that's where you see real live body language in action. You see natural. It's like, who's that old guy that does all the, watching whales and the animals running around. He talks and comments on it as they're doing it and tells you what's happening. It's kind of like that. It's kind of like one of those wildlife shows, but it's just down, at lunch or in a restaurant for supper or in a party, anywhere, just anywhere there are groups of people. You can sit there with church, or you can sit there and watch them and see what they're doing. And you can see these things that we talk about on here, and some of your questions that you have, you'll see these things we talk about in those groups of people. All right. Discuss the role. Would you please discuss the role of body language in a courtroom setting, particularly in jury perception? In jury perception and decision making. That's actually important for both sides. That's a good question. When I'm doing what they call it voir dire, when you go in and you help, you don't really choose a jury. You don't pick jury members. You actually get rid of members of who may be on the jury, people you don't want. Okay, you want to make sure that you choose the person you want. So you don't want a person who seems like they're going to pop off and just seems like a wild card, that kind of person. So you suggest that you get rid of that person out of the large group of people to pick from, right? But let's say you get through, and the people you want, you'd want a teacher or someone like that to be in charge, because they're probably going to be the one who's the foreman of the jury, the one's going to be in charge. So once you decide you think who's the foreman of the jury, once it's been settled, as you go through the trial, then you sort of focus your answers and everything toward that one person, but you say things and couch things in examples that they may understand, which they can explain to other people. All right. What are the limitations of body language analysis in high-stress environments such as military, emergency responses, and police operations? Who's sending these questions? Who talks like this? Okay. When you deal with the body language changes when you get into a high-stress situation. Say it is military, say it is you're a first responder, and you go into a situation, things change dramatically because you're not thinking like we're thinking right now, like all relaxed and sitting here talking. It's a situation where you might be killed, or you might have to save somebody from being killed, or you might have to save somebody's life from bleeding to death, or keep it from getting blown up, those types of things. So your body language looks different and everything is on, and you stiffen up a little bit and straighten up a little bit because your limbic system is on fire at that point. When those things pop, for most people, when those things pop off, that's when you really get in, you feel the rush and you start breathing heavier because your muscles need more blood and your brain needs more blood. Everything just kind of perks up because your limbic system says, okay, something's getting ready to happen. It's basically freeze, fight, or flight, but you've decided you're going to go forward. You wouldn't go forward to fight. Sometimes you would in the law enforcement, the military parts, but in emergency, you have to go forward, even though it's going to be maybe horrific. You have a job to do and you do it. So that's the way body language changes. You get really focused. Things to zero in on the one thing right there. But the key to those things to help you and others from getting hurt or killed in the law enforcement part is be able to zero in on that, but also keep an eye on what's going on around you. Not by turning your head all the time, but being aware of what's going on. You may have to get up and look around real quick while you're dealing with something. You may be focused on one person, but you have to keep an eye on what's happening, especially if you're by yourself. There's a buddy of mine, I'll tell this story, but I won't tell where it is. And he's a firefighter, and he's part of the rescue team. And one time there was a truck, tractor trailer wreck, and it was a gas truck. It was on fire. And this guy, my buddy, climbs up in there. They get the door open, and he's hanging down into it. And this guy's sitting there trapped in his seat. And he said, "Go on, leave me alone. This is going to blow up." So he's thinking, this thing's going to blow up. But then he thinks, wait a minute, I got to get this guy out of here. Even though this thing's most likely going to blow up and be on TV and everything else, because it's a big full gas truck that's on fire from the front part of the truck. But this guy's, I don't see how these guys do this. I really don't. When you talk to these firefighters and rescue people, they do some crazy stuff that we never hear about. And then you hear them talking, telling these stories. It gets crazy. And you go, that sounds like a TV show. And they go, yeah, anyway. And they just keep talking like it's absolutely nothing. I think it's absolutely, that blows my mind how they do that. Because if I had one of those things happen to me, people would hate me at Thanksgiving because that's all I would talk about every Thanksgiving. The time I jumped into there was a truck on fire and I got the guy out. It was a burning truck. It was a gas truck too. Can you imagine? And they would be mouthing what I was saying because I had said it for the last 13, 14 years. And I would do that. You need to know that. If I rescued somebody out of a truck on fire, yeah, man, that's all you're going to hear from me. You're going to meet me. And I would say, hey, I'm Scott Rouse. How are you? I saved a guy from a truck on fire, a burning tractor trailer. It was a gas truck. It was on fire. And here's what happened. And you would hate me. Anybody that met me would say, here comes that guy. They got the gas truck guy. Yeah, that guy. All right, come on. All right, I hadn't seen it. That's the way it would go down. So I don't see how they do it. I think something might be wrong with them. I'll leave it there. Let's see. What is the relationship between mental health and body language? Can changes in nonverbal cues be early indicators of psychological distress? I can talk to you about psychological distress, but I can't talk to you about mental health. I could, but I'm not, because that's not my expertise. I want you to think, wow, he knows about me. I don't, and I might give you some bad information. And I'm in that place where I don't want to give any bad information, because when I'm training and I give somebody bad information, it might get them killed. Talking about mental health may not get you killed, but I'm most likely going to be giving you the wrong information when it comes to things like that, because I know not much about it at all. I know when I see it. A lot of us do. You do too, most likely, but I don't know anything about that. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend I do and say, oh, here's what happened. I don't know. I appreciate the question, but I'm not going to, I can't get in there because I don't know enough about it. How does the concept of personal space vary across cultures? Well, what impact does this have on communication? That's a good one. So let's say in different countries, it's all different in different countries. For example, if let's say one of our military people go to the Middle East, and here was one of the big problems when they first started going there, was people would walk up, and they were just nice people that wanted to meet an American and see what was going on, or just talk to them because they'd never seen an American before. And they were friendly. And when they'd come up to them, they'd get right here in their face. And these people just deck them because in America, you walk so close, you're like, okay, well, here it comes. And they stop right there. Hey, man, or right there. What's going on? But these people would just come right up and get right in their face, and they would hold them and then hit them because they thought they were being aggressive to them, until they were like, hang on a second. That's not what's happening here. That's the way they are. It's their culture. So you have to get that figured out. At the time, a lot of these people didn't have time to learn about the culture over there because some things had happened. Everybody had to go really quickly. So that was a really an interesting situation dealing with body language and culture, because who gets that close? People in the Middle East. Then you deal with, let's say, one of the things I always talk about in when I'm training companies is when you deal with people, let's say it's a banking situation. And you go somewhere and you've got a bunch of people from one country, a bunch of people from another country, and 3 or 4. And then from another one, they're all meeting together. And you'll see the Japanese stand in one place, and they'll all be looking at you, and they'll smile real big and laugh a little bit. Not always, sometimes is what I'm talking about. And what they're doing is what they naturally do. And quite often when the Japanese person gets embarrassed, they'll laugh, and they cover their mouth and laugh. Oops, sorry. And the Germans may think, oh, what are they laughing at? It'd be probably more the Americans. What are they laughing at? Well, he didn't do anything. Look at those. And then you've got these little things started between them. All of a sudden the Americans don't like the Japanese. The Germans don't like the Americans because they're eating something, something like that. So you have to, it's good to have your company where you can, if you're an international company, understand the customs and the body language of that culture and how they act. Because it's really different in different countries. And when you get groups of those countries together, it breaks down from being the large country down to the smaller. It's like their own little country right there. And you can see the differences body language wise, culturally, because of the way they react to each other in groups. As horrible as this sounds, I love to watch that happen. I love seeing that. It's very subtle. It's not one of those, it's not huge. You can't sit there, great. All right, here we go. Watch it. But you watch it. It's really subtle. They're not far off, these groups. They're all quite often in the same room and they're not all bunched up together, but you can see them around the room as they see other people and they talk with each other. It's really fascinating. So if you ever see, if you're in a company that is like that or similar to that, check that out. It's fascinating. Watch how other people act as a group, not against, but as they deal with another or talking about another group of people. Especially if they haven't met before, that's the key. You got to get into one of those. It's awesome from a body language perspective. If you're into culture and body language. All right. How does the interpretation of eye contact differ across cultures? Here's my culture question. What implications does this have for international diplomacy or business? I think I pretty much just covered all that, pretty much. So let's go on to the next one. It's some people find too much eye contact threatening, and some people find not enough eye contact disrespectful. So it depends on what country you're from. But that's basically what you're dealing with, because some people in some countries, they'll get a little too close, they'll look you right in the eye and keep looking at you as you talk and all that, and it gets a little uncomfortable. So Americans look away and we'll talk for a few minutes and then, yeah, that sounds good. So when it's comfortable to look away because it makes you uncomfortable just staring at somebody. But what if that person doesn't stop staring at you? That makes you even more uncomfortable. So but there are countries where that happens, where people stare at you longer. So there's a lot of different, there are cultural differences in the gaze time when you gaze at someone and how you look at them. Some of these questions sound like a robot wrote them. Maybe it's AI. Maybe people are AI in questions. That would make sense. Didn't even think about that right this very minute. So that's how you're asking some people. But I got a lot of questions that aren't AI, obviously. And I'll get to those. Don't worry. If you've asked me a question, that's one we haven't answered already. I'll get to it. But that AI stuff, when you get into Chat GPT and that thing will answer anything. However, when you're dealing with body language and you go in there and go, what is it? What is eye? Tell me about eye movement and body language. How do you know if somebody's lying and telling the truth? All that thing's doing is collecting information. It's not a big brain of thinking. It just puts information together and delivers it to you based on your question, or creates a picture or a video or whatever it is you need. And you have to, that's why AI is such a big deal now, as far as people think that's Google. And they think, oh, here's some facts. Not that Google's always factual, but at least you can see where the studies came from. This thing doesn't show where it got its information. So you don't know if it gives you information, you can't say, oh, I know this, and then you can cite the study. That's the important part. And not only cite it, you got to go read it and make sure it's correct. That's what I do anyway. If you want to learn about body language and you Google something and they show those, oh, here's a study on so-and-so or a PDF about whatever, put in what body language you want to look for and then say, studies on, eye movement, studies on whatever it is, breath rate, blink rate, whatever you want to look up and find out about that. That's an easy way to learn a lot. But make sure you find out where your information comes from, because there's so much bad information out there. That's the dangerous part. A lot of people, like I said before, you have an expert come in and tell you about the 738-55 rule. Ugh. Let me know in the comments if you've experienced any things we went through in the questions, and let me know what's happening, because I actually do read them. A lot of people don't read their comments. You're not supposed to, because, man, they get rough in there sometimes. I read them. I don't care. I'll read them. I read them all. We'll see what everybody's thinking and what they want to know. I know it's not good. We talked about that on the behavior panel. Stay out of the comments. I love reading the comments. Some of them are really funny, and some of them are really mean. Those are the ones I like the best, though. And then I'd get in there and fuss with people in the comments. They'd say something and I'd say something back. I was trying to get them riled up, because I know 90% of the bad stuff is a bot or these people who plan to do that. And so you reply something, and the answer comes back something when they reply again has nothing to do with what you're talking about. So you go, oh, okay, that's actually something that's in there triggered to do that. I thought that was fascinating. And I'd always heard that, but quite often it's true. And then there was one time where somebody said something and I was wrong about it. I was so wrong about it. And so they said something and just took it completely wrong. And I smarted off, we'll say. And they came back and said, well, they said, you're wrong about this. And come to find out it was a real person. And I just I was like, and I decided because of the name it was like, whatever the name was and a bunch of zeros and an A and a B and a dash and a 1 or something. I was like, oh, this can't be real. So it's got to be a bot. And I was so wrong. It was horrible. And it was bad. I shouldn't have done that because I was mean. But I didn't think it was a human. And then got an email, said, you know what, I'm not a bot, I'm a human. And it really was. And she was sweet as she could be. And I felt so bad for doing that. I still do. It still makes me feel horrible because I just wailed on this nice woman. She was sweet as she could be. And I just let her have it. And then she explained to me what she was saying. And I was like, oh no, I thought you meant this. And she's like, no, not at all. So I managed to stay out of the comments. Maybe I will. Try this week. Start observing people from a baseline perspective. Going back to the question we had earlier. Think about not just picking a person, but, screw it, pick one person and watch that one person. But don't watch the one. I was going to say that because you may look creepy. You may just stare at them. But like I said before, you've got to observe casually because you don't want them to see you observing them. Because if you do, they're going to think you're odd. Let me give you an example. There was I was at Belmont, and that's a music school, but in Nashville, they had their entrepreneur class there, one of them, because they have a couple of courses in being an entrepreneur there. And they were doing pitches, and I was asked to come in and help them with their pitches. And, we'll watch them and then we'll break them down and say, here's what I would suggest, or here's what looks wrong, or here's how you can help with that pitch, right? So as we're doing this, and when you observe someone from that point of view, you got to watch all the way down from their head down to their feet. You got to watch everything, keep an eye on everything. And this one girl, she kept making these odd moves, and I was looking down, and then she started looking at me weird. And I was like, oh no. And I realized she must think I'm a foot freak or something because I was looking down at her feet because I was waiting to see one step back a little bit because it'd done it a couple of times. So I was sitting like this, but I was looking like that. So she thought I was being a creep, So now every time when I go do those, I have to say, look, I'm going to be watching you and I'm going to be watching all over you. Don't be uncomfortable because I'm not looking for anything weird. I'm just observing you and I'm going to look at all parts of you. I'm not a foot freak and I'm not a hand freak. I'm just watching how you move, and I'm watching how much you breathe, and I'm watching if you step backwards. I'm watching for everything you do. I'm keeping an eye on. So I don't want you to get the idea, and then I'll tell that story that just happened. But that's why I'm saying you have to observe casually. So as you observe someone, let's say, let me pick a good scenario. Let's say let's go back to work, and there's somebody standing around and they're talking. Look how they look when they're relaxed when they're talking to a friend of theirs, not like to the boss or somebody else who's, higher up and they can get in trouble or maybe get in trouble for something. But just watch them. Watch them for just a couple of minutes when they look relaxed. When you know it's a friend of theirs, they're not in trouble, and observe them. See how they act. And then pick somebody else through the middle part of the day. Observe them. Get you 2 or 3 people and watch them throughout the week. Do that. And then you'll start predicting, being able to predict what they're going to do. Don't tell anybody you're doing this. Don't tell anybody that I'm studying body language, because as soon as you do that, they're going to go, oh, really? Well, I got to watch the way I act around you. But trust me, you're going to get that if you do. So don't tell anybody you're observing anybody unless you get busted. But observe people. And pick you 2 or 3 and just watch them throughout the week. And you'll be able to predict what they're going to do quite often, not every time. But they'll do a little thing before they sit down, or they may pull their pants up, like, how you see people like guys will pull their pants up a little bit, their pants legs as they sit down, that kind of thing. Or they may put their coffee in the same place every time. What if they don't put their coffee in the same place every time? Are they coming to their desk fast? Or are they coming to their desk slow? What are they doing? What do they look around once they sit down? Look for that. Once they sit down, they look around, see what's going on, and then get back to what's going on. When they're going to their office, they look around and speak to people. They have their head down. Do they have their head up? Again, how fast are they going to the office? How often are they in their office? Those kind of things. But observe people. Start watching how they act and watching what they do. And look at it as almost like one of those, wildlife animal things we talked about earlier, one of those channels, one of those shows where they watch whales or fish or birds or whatever they're going to watch and see how that goes. You'll learn so much from doing that about people in general, because you'll start realizing everybody's pretty much doing the same stuff. You've got the big things everybody does, and you have these little small things that people do that you'll start noticing. And it's fascinating. And once you get a handle on that after a while, woof, then you can go even deeper. And you'll say, you know what, I wonder why they do that. And you hear somebody like me talk about it, and you go, I wonder who said that first. Where did that come from? Then you're hooked. It's over. Then you're in. There's no going back. So if you don't want to get in that deep, don't get into the studies, because once you do go, that's fascinating. Then you'll go, that was really easy to read. That was fairly simple. Wonder what this means. And you go start looking that up. Oh, so be careful when you do that, because once you get in, you're not going to want, most likely you're not going to want to get out. If you're that fascinated with it, ooh. And then you'll get a book on it and you say, I wonder who talks about that the most. And you'll find out from those studies, because they'll reference people in them. You go look them up. Yeah. Then you get even deeper. Oh, and if you're a nerd, it's fantastic. But if you're not, it's kind of boring. You can keep it light and just get the basics, which is fine too, which is what most people want to do. So, I mean, that's how people get into it, I think, in the first place. When I first got into it, my dad was a doctor. And we lived in this little bitty town called Louisa, Kentucky. And we lived right next door to the school, to the elementary school. And the hospital where my dad worked, when he was the only doctor there, was about 3 blocks over, a tiny little town in Kentucky, in eastern Kentucky. And my mom would come to school, and she'd bring my little brother, because he wasn't in school yet. And I was in, I guess, the first grade or second grade, which my sister was in the fourth grade, she was in the fourth. So my mom would bring my brother and come pick up me and my sister, however you say grammatically correct, my sister and me. And we'd walk down a couple of blocks to the hospital where my dad was, where he worked. And we'd eat lunch with him. And we'd eat lunch in his office. In his office, basically this hospital was 2 houses stuck together, these big houses that they just connected. He was the surgeon, he was the general practitioner, did all of it there. And we'd eat lunch with him, but we'd eat in his office, but we'd eat in this, it was almost like, in his office was like this huge closet. It was really small in there, but we could sit in, we'd get food at the little cafeteria thing, and then come up and eat and talk and visit. And then when we were in there, you could see people. If you kind of went like this, you could see people out in the waiting room. That's how small this was. So as I'm sitting there, we're eating, I see these 2 people I know. I see these 2 guys I know from the second grade. Robert Bellamy and a buddy of mine, Billy Elkins. And I said to my dad, how you say as a kid, hey man, I know those dudes. What are they doing here? And he said, hang on a minute, I'll tell you. And he looked out the door. He looked at one of them. Then he looked at the other one. And he goes, well, Billy is sick. He doesn't feel good at all. He's got an earache. And see how it was Robert. That's what it was. He said, Robert is sick. He's actually staying home from school. Today because he's got an earache. And his mom's been up all night with him. And he said, and Billy, he's pretending he's sick, and there's nothing wrong with him. I guess he just wants to get out of school. And I said, well, how do you know this? And he said, well, I'll tell you. He said, let's take a look at Robert and his mother. And I said, okay. Robert was sitting there and had his hand on his ear, leaning on his mom, and looked all sad. He said, you see that? See how he's got his hand on his ear? And I said, yeah. He said, see how he's got that frowny face? And I said, yeah. He said, he didn't feel good at all. His ear hurts. I said, let's look at his mother. So we looked at Mrs. Bellamy, and he said, see how her hair is, and we knew her, see how her hair isn't normal like it usually is? It looks like she just got up. I said, yeah. He said, it's been combed and all that, but if we look at it, we know she hasn't done her hair. And I said, how do you say this to a kid? Because I understood it. And I said, yeah, I see that. He said, that lets me know she's been up all night with him or been up late and they got up early to come down here. And she didn't take the time to prep and get ready because she's worried about him. She came down here. Oh, okay. I said, well, what about Billy? He said, now, here's what's going on with Billy. He looked at him. He said, now, Billy's pretending to be sick. He's, see how he's sitting on the little bench there? He was sitting on the little bench right next to his mom. I said, yeah, and he was dangling his legs. See how he's dangling his legs? I said, yeah. I said, lets me know he's not worried about much. See, you notice he's reading that little magazine. I think it was Highlights. That thing used to be in the dentist office when you were a kid. Highlights magazine. And he said he's reading Highlights. And look at his mother. She's got on lipstick. Her hair's done. You know, we knew her too. And she looks, looks like she should look. She looks normal, like she took time to prepare to come down here. I said, yeah. He said, now here's what's going to happen next. And I think this is where my fascination with what's going to happen next came from. He said, Billy is going to put his magazine down real slow, and he's going to look up at his mother, and he's going to put that frowny face on like Robert has, and he's going to say something to his mother. And then he's going to put his head back down this way. His mother will turn her head, and she'll listen to him, and then she'll pat him on the arm. And then that frowny face is going to go away. He's going to bring the magazine back up, and he's going to start dangling his legs. And I said, okay. I don't remember how much time passed. It might have been 10 seconds. It might have been 30 seconds, but I kept watching. And that happened. I was in the floor. I said, this guy is magic. How does he know it? How does he know this? And I said, how do you know that's going to happen? And he tried to explain it to me. I was too young to understand. But his attempt to explain it to me kept me thinking, how does he know that's what's going to happen next? How could he tell how could he tell the future? Even though the future is only 30 seconds or a minute away, how do you know what was going to happen? That's what got me whenever you are in the first or second grade, however old that is. And I was completely fascinated by it from then on. Could not get enough of it. And he'd bring me home stuff, he would read me stuff, that I couldn't understand, but he would make it so I could understand it. And then there was a book that came out. I never can remember the guy's name. It was the first book on body language. And what's his name? I can't remember. And he brought me that later on. It was a few years later when I was old enough, I think, to read it. And that was the first body language book I remember. I've got a copy of it somewhere. And there was a state trooper that I was training. And he told me, he said, do you remember this book by so-and-so? I said, yeah, it's the very first body language book. And he said, yeah. I said, why? You got one? He said, yeah, I've got one. I said, me too, man. I've got one. I've had one forever. Got the one my dad gave me. And he said, well, they've updated it. And I said, what? I hope so. So that's the last time somebody's asked me about that book, though. But I think I've talked about it since then. That's how I got into all this. Why don't you tell me how you got into this? If you can do it fairly shortly in the comments, let me know where you got started, how you got interested in this. So, all right. Then I'll see you next time.